In the mystical kingdom of Arenville, where ancient magic flowed through every stone and stream, for great races had coexisted for millennia in an uneasy balance of power and prejudice. Werewolves ruled vast territories with their clan-based hierarchies. Vampires controlled the night from their shadowed citadels. Dragons soared over mountain peaks guarding hoards of knowledge and gold, and demons walked among mortals wielding powers that bent reality itself. But it was among the werewolves that the most rigid social structures had evolved, where alphas commanded respect through strength and dominance, while omegas lived lives constrained by tradition and expectation. The Silver Blood Pack had claimed the Moonwood territory for over 3 centuries, their bloodline carrying magic that made them formidable warriors and cunning leaders. Their territory stretched across ancient forests where silver moonlight filtered through leaves that never fully lost their autumn colors, creating a landscape that seemed caught between seasons and dreams. At the heart of this mystical realm stood Silverhaven, the pack's central stronghold, where generations of werewolves had lived, loved, and died according to laws written in blood and tradition. It was here that Kaelin Moonwhisper had grown to adulthood, carrying within his gentle frame a secret that made him both invaluable and vulnerable in the eyes of his pack. At 23, he possessed the rare gift of healing magic, an ability that allowed him to mend wounds with a touch and ease pain with whispered words. But in a society that valued physical strength and aggressive dominance above all else, his gentle nature and magical abilities marked him as different, suspect, potentially dangerous to the established order. Kaelin had learned early to hide the full extent of his powers, practicing his healing arts in secret while presenting the facade of a typical Omega. His copper hair caught firelight like burnished metal, and his green eyes held depths that spoke of ancient wisdom flowing through his veins. But it was his empathic nature that truly set him apart. He could feel the pain of others as if it were his own, could sense the emotional wounds that conventional medicine could never touch. The Omega quarters of Silverhaven were comfortable but clearly separate from the areas where alphas lived and ruled. Kaelin shared his living space with other unmated Omegas, all of whom looked forward to the day when they would be chosen by worthy alphas and elevated to their true purpose as mates and bearers of the next generation. But unlike his quarters mates, Kaelin had always felt uncertain about this predetermined path, sensing that his healing abilities might require something different from him than traditional Omega roles allowed. It was during the Harvest Moon ceremony, when the magical energies of Arenville reached their peak and fated bonds were most likely to manifest, that Kaelin's carefully ordered world would be shattered forever. The entire pack had gathered in the sacred grove where their ancestors had performed bonding rituals for countless generations. The ancient trees draped with silver banners that caught and reflected the supernatural light of the full moon. Alpha Ryan Silverfang stood at the center of the ceremonial circle, magnificent in his formal robes that emphasized his powerful build and natural authority. At 25, he had already proven himself as a warrior and leader, destined to inherit control of the pack when his father stepped down. His dark hair was bound with silver chains that marked his rank, and his ice-blue eyes surveyed the assembled Omegas with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to having his choice of anything he desired. The ceremony began with the traditional invocations, Elder Marcus calling upon the moon goddess to bless any fated bonds that might manifest under her silver light. Around the grove, pack members held their breath in anticipation, knowing that witnessing a true fated bond was one of the most sacred experiences their kind could share. Kaelin stood with the other unmated Omegas, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. He had always known that his healing abilities made him different, but he couldn't deny the secret hope that somewhere among the alphas was someone who would value his gifts rather than fear them, someone who would see strength in his gentleness rather than weakness. The silver light began as a faint glow around Kaelin's heart, spreading through his body like liquid moonlight until his entire form was wreathed in ethereal radiance. Around the grove, gasps echoed through the crowd as they recognized the unmistakable sign of a fated bond awakening. But the light was not his alone. Across the ceremonial circle, Alpha Ryan began to glow with the same supernatural luminescence, his powerful frame outlined in silver fire. The two lights reached for each other across the intervening space, creating a bridge of pure magical energy that connected the Omega healer to the future pack leader. For a moment, Kaelin felt complete in a way he had never experienced before, as if a part of his soul that had always been missing had suddenly returned to him. The bond pulsed between them, beautiful and sacred and undeniably real. But as Kaelin stepped forward, following the ancient protocol that required both partners to approach each other and formally accept the bond, he saw something in Ryan's eyes that made his blood turn to ice. Instead of joy or even simple acceptance, the Alpha's face was twisted with disgust and rage. His powerful hands clenched into fists as he stared at the silver light that connected them. "No," Ryan snarled, his voice cutting through the ceremonial atmosphere like a blade through silk. "This is impossible. This is wrong." The words hit Kaelin like physical blows, but worse was yet to come. Ryan stepped forward, his alpha authority making every wolf in the grove instinctively lower their heads in submission. "The moon goddess has made a mistake," Ryan declared, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the sacred space. "I will not be bound to a weak Omega whose unnatural magic makes him less than a true wolf. This bond is a corruption, not a blessing." Before Kaelin could process what was happening, Ryan reached out with his alpha power and grasped the silver thread that connected them. The touch of his rejection was like acid burning through Kaelin's very soul, but the alpha wasn't finished with his cruelty. "You are broken," Ryan spat, his ice-blue eyes boring into Kaelin's with unmistakable hatred. "Your magic makes you weak, your nature makes you unsuitable, and your very existence is an insult to our bloodline. I reject this bond, I reject this Omega, and I reject everything you represent." With a violent motion that sent shockwaves of agony through both their magical signatures, Ryan tore the fated bond apart. The silver light that had connected them exploded in a burst of raw magical energy, leaving Kaelin collapsed on the ground as psychic pain beyond description tore through his mind and body. The severed bond left wounds that went deeper than flesh, jagged tears in his very soul that bled spiritual energy and left him gasping for breath that wouldn't come. Around him, the pack's reaction was swift and devastating. Instead of outcry at the treatment of a fated bond, instead of demands for justice or explanation, murmurs of agreement began to ripple through the crowd. "The Alpha is right," someone whispered loud enough to be heard. "Healing magic is unnatural for our kind. An Omega with such abilities would weaken the bloodline," another voice added. Elder Marcus stepped forward, his ancient face creased with disappointment as he looked down at Kaelin's broken form. "True fated bonds cannot be severed so easily," he declared, his voice carrying the weight of spiritual authority. This was clearly a false manifestation, a trick of corrupted magic that has no place among pure wolves. The formal rejection of the bond's validity by the pack's spiritual leader completed Kaelin's destruction. He tried to stand, tried to speak in his own defense, but the trauma of the severed bond had left him barely conscious and entirely unable to function. Ryan approached him one final time, leaning down to speak directly into his ear so that every word would be clear despite the roaring in Kaelin's head from the magical backlash. "I need a strong alpha to stand beside me," Ryan said, his voice cold as winter wind. "Not a broken Omega who practices forbidden magic and brings shame to our traditions. You are worthless to me, worthless to this pack, and worthless to any future we might build." To emphasize his point, Ryan spat directly into Kaelin's face, the ultimate insult among their people. The saliva mixed with the blood that was flowing from Kaelin's nose and ears, creating a mess that spoke eloquently of his complete degradation. "By the authority of my rank and the will of the moon goddess," Ryan continued, speaking loud enough for the entire pack to hear, "I declare this Omega corrupted beyond redemption. He is cast out from our protection, stripped of our name, and marked as unworthy of pack law." The formal exile hit Kaelin like a final blow to his already shattered spirit. To be cast out by one's own pack was considered a fate worse than death among werewolves. It meant becoming a non-person, existing outside the protection of clan law and social structure. Pack leader Silverfang stepped forward, his face a mask of cold authority as he looked down at his broken pack member. "You have brought shame upon our bloodline with your unnatural abilities," he declared. "Your presence here is a contamination that threatens the purity of our traditions. You have until dawn to leave our territory, and if you are found here after sunrise, you will be hunted as a rogue. As the pack dispersed, many spitting in Kaelin's direction or making gestures to ward off evil, he remained collapsed in the sacred grove, too broken in body and spirit to move. The severed fated bond had left him with injuries that his own healing magic couldn't touch, wounds to his very essence that might never fully heal. Hours later, as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Kaelin finally found the strength to stand. His few possessions had been gathered by pack servants and dumped unceremoniously at the edge of the ceremonial ground, a final insult that emphasized his new status as someone unworthy of even basic courtesy. With nowhere else to go and dawn approaching rapidly, Kaelin gathered his meager belongings and walked away from the only home he had ever known. Behind him, the Silver Blood Pack continued their lives as if he had never existed, already beginning the process of erasing his memory from their collective consciousness. The journey through the wilderness that followed was a nightmare of physical and emotional agony. Kaelin's Omega physiology, designed for the safety and support of pack life, was poorly equipped for survival in the harsh forests that lay beyond pack territory. His healing magic, severely weakened by the trauma of his severed bond, could barely maintain his basic bodily functions, let alone help him find food or shelter. For weeks, he wandered through ancient woodlands where creatures that owed allegiance to no pack hunted in the shadows between the trees. His clothes, torn by thorns and stained with his own blood, hung in tatters on his increasingly gaunt frame. The brand that marked him as an exile had been magically burned into his shoulder, a permanent reminder of his shame that would identify him to any supernatural being he encountered. The forests beyond pack territory were home to dangers that most werewolves never had to face. Wild magic flowed freely here, creating pockets of reality where the laws of nature bent and twisted in unpredictable ways. Feral creatures that had once been civilized beings roamed in search of prey, their minds destroyed by exposure to raw magical energies. And worst of all, these lands were hunting grounds for those who preyed upon the supernatural community. Slavers, traffickers, and worse. It was hunger that finally brought Kaelin down. After days without food, his body simply gave up its struggle against starvation and exposure. He collapsed beside a stream that ran silver under the moonlight, its waters carrying traces of magic that made them beautiful but dangerous to drink. As consciousness faded, Kaelin found himself almost grateful for the approaching end. What kind of life awaited a packless Omega with no family, no home, and no purpose? But death did not come for Kaelin in that moonlit glade. Instead, he was found by Lucian Valther, Lord of the Northern Reaches and one of the most powerful vampires in all of Orenville. The vampire had been traveling through the disputed territories when he caught the scent of werewolf blood mixed with something far more intriguing, the signature of healing magic unlike anything he had encountered in his centuries of existence. Lucian stood 6 feet tall with the pale, otherworldly beauty that marked him as one of the ancient vampire bloodlines. His midnight black hair fell in waves to his shoulders, and his silver eyes held the weight of experiences accumulated over more than 500 years. He wore traveling clothes that managed to be both practical and elegant, cut from materials that spoke of wealth and power beyond mortal comprehension. "Well," Lucian murmured as he knelt beside Kaelin's unconscious form, his vampire senses analyzing everything from the Omega's magical signature to the story told by his injuries. "What do we have here? A werewolf with healing abilities, cast out by his pack and left to die in the wilderness. How wasteful." The vampire's touch was cool against Kaelin's fevered skin as he checked for signs of life, his supernatural hearing easily detecting the weak but steady heartbeat that indicated survival was still possible. More intriguingly, he could sense the remnants of powerful magic woven through the Omega's essence, healing abilities that could be invaluable to someone with the wisdom to recognize their worth. "You're not dying on my watch, little wolf," Lucian said, gathering Kaelin into his arms with the effortless strength of his kind. "I have need of a healer, and you have need of a protector. Perhaps we can be of service to each other." The journey to Lucian's domain took place in a luxurious carriage that spoke of wealth accumulated over centuries of careful investment and strategic planning. Kaelin drifted in and out of consciousness during the travel, aware of gentle hands tending to his injuries and a voice speaking words in languages he didn't recognize. ancient healing incantations that eased his pain and stabilized his condition. Shadowmere Castle stood on a cliff overlooking the northern sea, its Gothic architecture blending seamlessly with the jagged rocks that surrounded it. Ancient beyond measure, the fortress had been built to withstand both physical assault and magical attack, its walls inscribed with protective wards that made the very air shimmer with contained power. As they approached the main gates, Kaelin could feel the layers of defensive magic that protected the structure. Spells so complex and powerful that they made his healing abilities seem like candle flames beside a bonfire. "Welcome to Shadowmere," Lucian said as their carriage passed through gates that swung open at their approach. "This will be your home for the foreseeable future, assuming you prove useful enough to maintain." The interior of the castle was a marvel of vampire architecture and accumulated treasures. Vast halls lined with tapestries that depicted centuries of history, libraries containing knowledge from civilizations that had fallen before human memory began, and laboratories where experiments that could reshape reality itself were conducted with casual precision. Lucian led him through corridors that seemed to stretch on forever, past rooms filled with artifacts that radiated power and mystery. Finally, they arrived at a suite of chambers that would serve as Kaelin's quarters, comfortable but clearly designed more for containment than hospitality. "Your duties will be explained in detail once you've recovered," Lucian said, his tone formal and distant as he helped Kaelin to the bed that dominated the room. "For now, rest and heal. I have no use for damaged property." With that dismissal, the vampire left Kaelin alone in his new circumstances, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the stone corridors until silence settled like a shroud. Kaelin lay on the comfortable bed and tried to process the enormity of what had happened to him. In the span of a few weeks, he had gone from respected pack member to exiled Omega to, what? Servant? Slave? Something else entirely? The first few days at Shadowmere established a routine that was both better and worse than Kaelin had expected. Better because Lucian made no demands for personal service or intimate companionship, treating him with cool professionalism rather than the cruelty he might have expected from a vampire master. Worse because the emotional distance and complete lack of acknowledgement of his personhood was almost more devastating than outright abuse would have been. Lucian's requirements were specific and utilitarian. Kaelin was to maintain his healing abilities through regular practice and meditation, keep himself in good physical condition, and be available when summoned to provide medical services. The vampire had an extensive library on magical theory that Kaelin was allowed to access, and his quarters were comfortable if not luxurious. But there was no warmth in their interactions, no recognition that Kaelin was anything more than a particularly valuable piece of property. Lucian spoke to him only when necessary, gave him orders with the same tone he might use to command a servant, and never showed the slightest interest in his thoughts, feelings, or experiences. The purpose behind Kaelin's rescue became clear when Lucian finally summoned him to the castle's medical wing. There, lying in a bed surrounded by the most advanced healing equipment Kaelin had ever seen, was a young vampire who appeared to be in his late teens. The boy's breathing was labored, his pale skin showing the dark veins that indicated some form of magical poisoning, and his silver eyes were clouded with pain. "This is my ward, Damien," Lucian said without preamble, his usual composure showing the first cracks Kaelin had seen since their meeting. "He was attacked by hunters using cursed weapons designed specifically to kill our kind. My court physicians have been unable to reverse the damage, and conventional vampire healing has proved ineffective." Kaelin approached the bed carefully, his healing senses automatically extending to assess the patient's condition. What he found made him gasp in horror. The curse was not just poisoning Damien's body but attacking his very essence, slowly draining away his supernatural nature in a process that would eventually leave him a mindless husk. "How long has he been like this?" Kaelin asked, his professional instincts overriding his personal circumstances. 6 weeks, Lucian replied, his voice carrying a note of strain that was the first real emotion Kaelin had heard from him. "Every healer in the vampire territories has declared his condition hopeless. You are my final option." Kaelin placed his hands on Damien's forehead, letting his healing magic flow into the young vampire's system. The curse fought back immediately, recognizing his power as a threat and attempting to corrupt his magic in return. But Kaelin's abilities had been refined by years of secret practice and deepened by his recent trauma. He was able to resist the curse's influence while slowly beginning to unravel its hold on Damien's essence. The healing process took hours, with Kaelin pouring his energy into the complex work of separating curse from soul without damaging either. When it was finally complete, both healer and patient were exhausted, but Damien's breathing had returned to normal and the dark veins beneath his skin had faded to nothing. "It is done," Kaelin said, swaying on his feet from the effort he had expended. "The curse is broken, though he will need time to recover his full strength." For the first time since they had met, Lucian looked at Kaelin as if he were a person rather than a tool. The vampire's silver eyes held surprise, gratitude, and something that might have been the beginning of respect. "You have given me back my ward's life," Lucian said quietly, his voice carrying an emotion that Kaelin couldn't quite identify. "That is a debt that cannot be easily repaid." "I require no payment beyond our existing arrangement," Kaelin replied, though he couldn't hide the satisfaction he felt at having used his abilities for their intended purpose. "Healing is what I was born to do." As Damien's recovery progressed over the following weeks, the dynamic between Kaelin and Lucian began to shift in subtle ways. The vampire still maintained his formal distance, but there were moments when his mask would slip slightly, revealing glimpses of the complex person beneath the intimidating exterior. It began with small things. Lucian would ask Kaelin's opinion about Damien's care rather than simply giving orders. He would inquire about Kaelin's needs and comfort, ensuring that his property was being properly maintained. Most significantly, he began to spend time in the medical wing even when his presence wasn't strictly necessary, observing Kaelin's work with what appeared to be genuine interest. "Your magic is unlike anything I have studied," Lucian commented one evening as Kaelin completed his daily examination of Damien. "Most healing abilities work by accelerating natural recovery processes, but yours seems to actually restore what has been lost." "It's difficult to explain," Kaelin said, surprised by the vampire's interest in the technical aspects of his abilities. "I don't just heal injuries. I help things return to what they were meant to be. Sometimes that means mending flesh. Sometimes it means repairing spirits." "And what were you meant to be?" Lucian asked, the question carrying implications that made Kaelin's heart race. "I don't know," Kaelin admitted, his voice carrying the pain of his recent rejection. "My pack believed I was meant to be a traditional Omega, subservient and silent. The moon goddess seemed to suggest I was meant to be an Alpha's mate. But neither of those paths led anywhere but pain and rejection." "Perhaps," Lucian said thoughtfully, his silver eyes studying Kaelin's face with new intensity, "you were meant to be exactly what you are, a healer whose gifts transcend the narrow expectations of others." The conversation marked another shift in their relationship, one that saw Lucian beginning to treat Kaelin as something approaching an equal rather than merely a valuable possession. They began to spend evenings together in the castle's vast library, discussing magic, philosophy, and the complex politics of the supernatural world. Kaelin discovered that Lucian was far more than the cold, arrogant vampire he had initially appeared to be. Centuries of existence had given him a perspective on life that was both profound and melancholic, shaped by the weight of too much knowledge and too many losses. He had seen kingdoms rise and fall, watched mortal races discover and forget the same truths over and over again, and learned that attachment to others only led to inevitable pain when their shorter lifespans brought them to their ends. "I have lived for over 500 years, Lucian told him one evening as they sat by the fire in the library, sharing wine that was older than most civilizations. "In that time, I have seen everything I cared about turn to dust. Friends, lovers, even enemies. They all fade while I remain unchanged. It teaches you to maintain distance, to avoid forming connections that will only cause suffering." "But isn't the suffering worth it?" Kaelin asked, thinking of his own experience with love and loss. "Isn't it better to have felt something real, even if it doesn't last, than to feel nothing at all?" Lucian was quiet for a long moment, his silver eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Perhaps," he said finally, "but I am not sure I remember how to take that risk." As autumn deepened into winter, their relationship continued to evolve in ways that surprised both of them. Lucian began to show Kaelin the castle's more private chambers, sharing treasures and memories that he had kept hidden for decades. Kaelin, in turn, began to open up about his own experiences, sharing the pain of his rejection and the fear that he would never find a place where he truly belonged. The turning point came when a group of vampire hunters attacked the castle, seeking to eliminate Lucian and claim the bounty that several kingdoms had placed on his head. During the battle, Kaelin made a choice that would change everything between them. Rather than remaining safely hidden as Lucian had commanded, he used his healing magic to tend to the wounded defenders, refusing to let anyone suffer when he had the power to help. When the attack was repelled and the hunters driven off, Lucian found Kaelin in the courtyard, exhausted but still working to heal a guard whose injuries would have been fatal without immediate intervention. "I told you to stay hidden," Lucian said, his voice tight with what Kaelin recognized as fear rather than anger. "I couldn't," Kaelin replied without looking up from his patient. "People were dying. I had to help." "You could have been killed," Lucian continued, kneeling beside him in the blood-soaked stone. "You're too valuable to risk in battle." "Is that all I am to you?" Kaelin asked, finally meeting the vampire's eyes. "Something valuable to be protected like a treasured object?" Lucian was quiet for a long moment, his silver gaze searching Kaelin's face as if seeing him for the first time. "No," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're much more than that. You're—" He trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the thought, but Kaelin heard the unspoken words in the vampire's silence. They were falling in love, despite every barrier that should have prevented it. Master and servant, vampire and werewolf, immortal and mortal. None of it seemed to matter when faced with the connection that had grown between them. The realization that he was developing feelings for Lucian both thrilled and terrified Kaelin. After the devastating rejection by Ryan and his pack, he had believed himself incapable of ever trusting another being with his heart. But Lucian had shown him kindness without expecting anything in return, had valued his abilities without trying to change his nature, and had treated him with respect even when he had no obligation to do so. More than that, Kaelin could see the loneliness that Lucian carried like a weight around his shoulders. Centuries of isolation self-imposed out of fear of loss. The vampire needed healing just as much as Damien had, though his wounds were emotional rather than physical. The crisis that would force them to confront their feelings came in the form of an unexpected visitor to Shadowmere Castle. Damien, now fully recovered and stronger than ever, burst into the library where Kaelin and Lucian were sharing their usual evening conversation. "Master," the young vampire said, his voice tight with urgency, "we have a problem. There's a delegation from the Silver Blood Pack at our gates, demanding the return of what they call stolen property." Lucian's expression darkened immediately, his vampire nature manifesting as the temperature in the room dropped several degrees. "Stolen property. They're here for Kaelin," Damien explained, shooting an apologetic glance at the Omega who had saved his life. "They claim he was taken illegally from their territory and demand his return for proper punishment." The blood drained from Kaelin's face as he processed the implications. His former pack had found him, and they were demanding his return not out of love or forgiveness but to complete the punishment they felt he deserved for his perceived crimes against their traditions. "They have no legal claim," Lucian said firmly, his vampire power beginning to manifest as frost forming in the air around him. "He was found dying in neutral territory and taken in under the ancient laws of salvage. Whatever happened before that is not my concern." "Actually," a new voice said from the library's entrance, "they might have a stronger claim than you think." All three turned to see a figure stepping out of the shadows. Ryan Silverfong himself, looking exactly as Kaelin remembered him but somehow diminished by the luxury of the vampire castle around him. The Alpha wore traveling clothes that spoke of a long journey, and his ice-blue eyes were fixed on Kaelin with an expression that mixed triumph with something that might have been regret. "Hello, Kaelin," Ryan said, his voice carrying the same arrogant confidence that had destroyed their bond months before. "You've been difficult to find. What do you want?" Kaelin asked, surprised by how steady his own voice sounded despite the fear racing through his veins. "I've come to bring you home," Ryan replied, as if the answer should have been obvious. The Pack Council has reconsidered your case. We're prepared to offer you a full pardon and restoration of your status, provided you return willingly and submit to appropriate re-education. The offer should have been everything Kaelin had dreamed of during his lowest moments: vindication, acceptance, a return to the life he had lost. Instead, he felt only a cold dread at the thought of going back to a place where his true nature would always be seen as a flaw to be corrected. "And if I refuse?" he asked. Ryan's expression hardened, his alpha nature beginning to manifest as dominance pheromones filled the air. "Then we take you back by force. Pack law is clear, you belong to us, regardless of whatever arrangements you've made with bloodsuckers. This creature," he gestured dismissively at Lucian, "may have purchased your body, but your soul belongs to the Silver Blood Pack." "His soul belongs to no one but himself," Lucian said, rising to his full height as his vampire power continued to build around him. "And I will not permit you to take him from my domain." "This isn't a negotiation, Leech," Ryan replied, his own supernatural abilities beginning to manifest as the air grew thick with competing magical energies. "We have tracked him across half the kingdom and called in favors from every Pack alliance in the Northern Territories. Return him now or face the consequences." The threat of war hung heavy in the air between them, two apex predators preparing to fight over territory and pride. But it was Kaelin who broke the standoff, stepping between them with a calm that surprised everyone present. "No," he said simply, his voice carrying a quiet authority that neither alpha nor vampire could ignore. "I won't go back." Ryan stared at him in disbelief. "You would choose slavery over freedom? Disgrace over redemption? I would choose a life where I'm valued for who I am over one where I'm punished for who I'm not," Kaelin replied, his healing magic beginning to flow around him like a visible aura. "You cast me out, rejected our bond, and declared me worthless. You don't get to change your mind just because it's become convenient. The Pack needs you," Ryan said, and for the first time there was something almost like pleading in his voice. "Your healing abilities, your magic. We realize now that we were wrong to reject such gifts." "You need my abilities," Kaelin corrected. "You don't need me, and I've found someone who values both." He turned to look at Lucian, putting all of his feelings into that single glance. The vampire's silver eyes widened as he recognized what Kaelin was offering. Not just defiance of his former pack, but a declaration of where his heart truly lay. "I choose to stay," Kaelin said, his words carrying the weight of a formal magical oath. "I choose the vampire who has shown me kindness over the pack that showed me cruelty. I choose the person who has valued my healing over those who saw it as weakness." The magical resonance of his oath filled the library, making it clear to all present that his decision was binding and irreversible. Ryan stepped back as if he had been struck, his face cycling through emotions too complex to categorize. "You're making a mistake," the alpha said finally. "Vampires don't form lasting bonds with other species. When he grows tired of you, when your novelty wears off, you'll be cast aside with even less ceremony than the Pack showed you." "Then that will be my choice to make," Kaelin replied steadily. "My mistake to live with, but it will be my choice, not something forced on me by traditions I never agreed to follow." Ryan looked as if he wanted to argue further, but something in Kaelin's expression must have convinced him that words would not change the outcome. "The Pack won't forget this betrayal," he said instead, "and they won't forgive it." "Good," Kaelin said with surprising venom, "because I won't forget their betrayal either, and I have no intention of forgiving it." After Ryan's departure, Kaelin and Lucian found themselves alone in the library, the weight of what had just happened settling between them like a physical presence. Kaelin had just publicly declared his loyalty to the vampire, had chosen a life of uncertain servitude over the possibility of redemption with his birth pack. "You didn't have to do that," Lucian said quietly, his usual composure cracked by the magnitude of what Kaelin had sacrificed. "I would have found a way to protect you without requiring such a choice." "Yes, I did," Kaelin replied, moving closer to the vampire until they were standing within arm's reach of each other. "Because it wasn't really about them at all. It was about choosing the life I want to live rather than the one others expect me to live. And what kind of life do you want? Lucian asked, his voice barely above a whisper. One where I'm free to be myself, Kaelin said, reaching out to place his hand on Lucian's chest, feeling the ancient heart beating beneath his palm. One where my abilities are seen as gifts rather than curses. One where someone values me for who I am rather than who they think I should be. And you believe you can find that here? With me? I believe I already have, Kaelin said, rising up on his toes to close the distance between them. The kiss that followed was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if both of them were afraid that too much passion might shatter the fragile connection they had built. But as their lips met and held, the careful control that had defined their relationship for months finally crumbled, replaced by the desperate hunger of two souls who had found something worth fighting for. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, their faces flushed with emotion and desire. I love you, Kaelin whispered, the words carrying all the vulnerability and hope he had thought destroyed by his pack's rejection. And I love you, Lucian replied, his ancient voice trembling with the weight of an admission he had never expected to make. More than I thought possible, more than I believed I still could. What followed was the most beautiful night of Kaelin's life, as Lucian showed him what it meant to be treasured rather than merely desired, to be loved for his gentleness rather than despite it. The vampire's centuries of experience translated into a patience and skill that left Kaelin gasping with pleasure. But more than that, it was the emotional intimacy that moved him to tears. The feeling of being completely accepted and cherished by someone who saw all of him and loved what he found. You are magnificent, Lucian whispered against his throat as they moved together in perfect rhythm. Beautiful and strong and everything I never knew I needed. I'm yours, Kaelin gasped, arching beneath the vampire's careful touch. Completely and forever yours. In the morning, they woke in each other's arms, their bodies intertwined and their hearts finally at peace. The challenges they faced hadn't disappeared, but for the first time since his rejection, Kaelin felt confident that he could face whatever came next as long as Lucian was beside him. Their happiness was interrupted by news that would test their resolve in ways neither had anticipated. Damien brought word that the werewolf packs had indeed called in their alliances, assembling an army that intended to reclaim their stolen property, by force if necessary. They're calling it a holy war, Damien reported, his young face grim with the implications. A crusade to prevent the corruption of their bloodlines by vampire influence. Every pack north of the Silverwood has pledged warriors to the cause. How many? Lucian asked, his mind already calculating defensive strategies. At least 3,000, possibly more. And they're not just wolves, they've called in favors from allied species who share their traditional views on interspecies relationships. Kaelin felt his heart sink as he realized the scope of what his decision had unleashed. Thousands would die because he had chosen love over duty, because he had refused to return to a life of shame and suppression. I have to go back, he said quietly, the words tasting like ashes in his mouth. I can't be responsible for a war. No, Lucian said firmly, his vampire power beginning to manifest around him. I will not allow you to sacrifice yourself for the prejudices of others. If they want war, they shall have it. But the cost of yielding to their demands would be far higher, Lucian interrupted. Not just for us, but for every being who refuses to conform to narrow definitions of acceptable behavior. This is about more than just our relationship, Kaelin. This is about the right to choose your own path regardless of the species you were born into. As they prepared for the coming conflict, Kaelin threw himself into his healing studies with renewed purpose. If war was inevitable, he would make sure his abilities were strong enough to save as many lives as possible, regardless of which side they fought for. It was during one of these intense training sessions that he made a discovery that would change everything. While practicing advanced healing techniques on a wounded hawk that had been brought to the castle, Kaelin felt his magic react in an entirely new way. Instead of simply mending the creature's injuries, his power seemed to awaken something deeper, a connection to the life force that flowed through all living things. The hawk's feathers began to glow with silver light, and when it took flight, Its form had somehow become more perfect, more ideal than any natural creature could be. It was as if Kaelin's magic had helped it become the truest version of itself, untainted by injury or imperfection. "What did you just do?" Lucian asked, having witnessed the transformation with his own eyes. "I don't know," Kaelin admitted, staring at his hands in wonder. "It felt like healing, but deeper somehow. Like I wasn't just fixing what was broken, but helping it become what it was always meant to be." Research into ancient texts revealed that what Kaelin had stumbled upon was a legendary form of magic thought to have been lost for millennia. The power to not just heal but to perfect, to help beings achieve their ideal forms and abilities. Among werewolves, this magic was associated with the moon-touched, legendary healers said to be the moon goddess's chosen champions. "If the old stories are true," Lucian said as they studied the relevant passages, "then you may be capable of transformations that go far beyond simple healing." The moon-touched were said to be able to take on perfected forms that combined the best aspects of human and wolf, along with magical abilities that surpassed both. The possibility was both thrilling and terrifying. If Kaelin could indeed access this legendary magic, it might give them the power they needed to defend themselves against the coming army. But it would also mark him as something even more different from normal wolves, potentially escalating the conflict beyond anything they had imagined. The decision was made for them when scouts reported that the Werewolf Alliance had reached the borders of vampire territory. Thousands of warriors had assembled under the combined banners of dozens of packs, all united in their determination to reclaim what they saw as stolen property and punish those who had facilitated the theft. At the head of this army rode Ryan Silverfang, now bearing the title of Supreme War Alpha and leading a coalition that represented the most traditional and militant elements of werewolf society. His transformation into a war leader seemed complete, any lingering regret about his treatment of Kaelin buried beneath layers of righteous indignation and political necessity. The first battle took place in the valley below Shadowmere Castle, where Lucian had assembled his own forces, vampires, allied magical creatures, and mercenaries who owed him various debts of honor or gold. The fighting was brutal and chaotic, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage in the initial exchanges. Kaelin watched the battle from the castle's highest tower, his heart breaking as he saw warriors from both sides falling to wounds that his magic could easily heal. The senseless waste of life, all because some refused to accept that love could transcend the boundaries of species and tradition, made him physically ill. It was when he saw Damien fall, struck down by a silver-tipped spear that had been aimed at Lucian, that something inside Kaelin finally snapped. The young vampire who had become like a brother to him lay bleeding in the mud, his life force ebbing away while the battle raged around him. Without conscious thought, Kaelin leaped from the tower, his healing magic surrounding him like a cocoon of silver light. But instead of slowing his fall, the magic seemed to transform him, reshaping his body even as he plummeted toward the battlefield below. When he landed among the combatants, it was not as the slight Omega who had been cast out by his pack, but as something altogether more magnificent. His form had grown larger and more powerful, his muscles dense with supernatural strength while retaining the grace that marked him as a healer. His copper hair had become pure silver, flowing like liquid moonlight, and his green eyes blazed with power that made even the most hardened warriors step back in awe. Most remarkably, he had gained a second form, not quite human, not quite wolf, but something that combined the best aspects of both. His hands had become clawed but retained their healing sensitivity. His senses had sharpened to supernatural levels, and his magic had magnified beyond anything he had ever experienced. "I am the moon-touched," he declared, his voice carrying across the entire battlefield with supernatural authority, champion of healing and protector of all who seek peace. This battle ends now. The transformation had not gone unnoticed by either army. Wolves who had come to drag him back in chains now stared in religious awe at a being they recognized from their oldest legends. Vampires who had fought beside Lucian for decades gazed in wonder at the perfected form their ally's mate had achieved. But it was Ryan who recovered first from the shock, his alpha pride refusing to be intimidated even by legendary magic. "Tricks and illusions," he snarled, drawing his ceremonial blade. "You're still the same weak Omega who couldn't defend his bond." No amount of flashy magic will change that. You're right, Kaelin said calmly, his perfected form radiating peace rather than aggression. I am the same person I was before, the same healer who was cast out for being too gentle, too different, too unwilling to conform to your narrow definitions of strength. He began to walk across the battlefield, his bare feet leaving glowing prints in the blood-soaked earth. With each step, his magic flowed outward, healing the wounded regardless of which side they had fought for. Wolves who had been mortally injured found their wounds closing. Vampires who had been near death felt their strength returning. But I've learned something since then, Kaelin continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the valley. I've learned that true strength isn't about the ability to hurt others. It's about the power to heal them. It's not about forcing others to submit to your will. It's about inspiring them to become their best selves. He stopped in front of Ryan, close enough that the Alpha could have struck him down with a single blow. But something in Kaelin's presence, some combination of his legendary transformation and the sheer force of his conviction, held the Supreme War Alpha frozen in place. I forgive you, Kaelin said, reaching out to place his hand on Ryan's armored chest. I forgive you for rejecting our bond, for casting me out, for bringing an army to drag me back to a life of shame. But I won't go with you. You don't have a choice, Ryan said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Everyone has a choice, Kaelin replied. You chose fear over love, tradition over growth, control over freedom. I choose differently. With a gesture that encompassed the entire battlefield, Kaelin let his healing magic flow freely, mending not just physical wounds but touching the hearts and minds of every warrior present. For a moment, they all felt what he felt, the possibility of a world where difference was celebrated rather than feared, where love could transcend every boundary, where strength was measured by the lives you saved rather than the lives you took. The effect was immediate and profound. Weapons began to drop from nerveless fingers as warriors on both sides remembered why they had originally taken up arms, to protect those they loved, not to enforce conformity through violence. The artificial unity that had held the werewolf alliance together began to crumble as individual wolves questioned whether this war was truly worth fighting. This changes nothing, Ryan said desperately, but even he seemed to be struggling against the influence of Kaelin's magic. The natural order must be preserved. Traditions must be maintained. Traditions that cause suffering are not worth maintaining, Kaelin replied gently. And there is nothing natural about forcing others to live lives that make them miserable just to satisfy your definitions of proper behavior. He turned to address the assembled armies, his voice carrying clearly to every warrior present. I was cast out for loving someone my pack deemed inappropriate, he said, condemned for possessing abilities they considered unsuitable, branded as broken for refusing to conform to expectations that would have destroyed everything that made me who I am. The silver light that surrounded him pulsed brighter, and his voice grew stronger with each word. But I found someone who valued my differences instead of fearing them. Someone who saw strength in my gentleness and beauty in my magic. I found love that asked me to be more myself, not less. His eyes found Lucian among the vampire forces, and the love that passed between them was visible to everyone present. This is what I choose to fight for, Kaelin continued. The right of every being to find love where they can, to express their true nature without shame, to build families based on choice rather than obligation. This is worth defending. The transformation of the battlefield was remarkable to witness. What had begun as a site of violence and hatred became something approaching a religious experience as warriors from both sides laid down their arms and began to reconsider the assumptions that had brought them to this point. Some of the more militant wolves attempted to continue the fight, but they found themselves increasingly isolated as their own packmates refused to support attacks on someone who was clearly blessed by the moon goddess herself. Even among the vampires, there was a sense that they were witnessing something historic, the birth of a new kind of leader who embodied healing rather than conquest. The formal end of the conflict came when Elder Marcus, the same spiritual leader who had branded Kaelin as corrupted, stepped forward from the wolf forces and fell to his knees before the transformed healer. Forgive us, moon-touched, the old werewolf said, his voice cracking with emotion. We have been blind. led by fear and tradition instead of wisdom and compassion. You are what we should have cherished instead of what we chose to cast out. There is nothing to forgive, Kaelin replied, helping the elderly wolf to his feet. We all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them and choose to do better. The reconciliation that followed was neither immediate nor complete, but it marked the beginning of a fundamental shift in how the supernatural world viewed relationships that crossed traditional boundaries. Kaelin's transformation into the legendary Moontouched had provided undeniable proof that the old ways were not the only ways, that love and acceptance could create strength beyond anything achieved through dominance and control. In the months that followed, Shadowmere Castle became a sanctuary for those who, like Kaelin, found themselves caught between worlds, beings whose love or abilities or simple existence challenged the narrow definitions of their birth communities. Under Kaelin's guidance and with Lucian's resources, they built something unprecedented. A place where difference was celebrated, where healing took precedence over harming, where families could be built on choice rather than chance. It was during this period of growth and change that they encountered Marcus, a young shapeshifter whose parents had been killed by hunters who couldn't determine what species he was supposed to be. The boy couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with the distinctive features of mixed heritage. Partly wolf, partly something else that no one could identify. Kaelin found him hiding in the castle's stables, his small body covered in cuts and bruises that spoke of recent abuse. The child's scent carried the taint of fear and desperation, mixed with magical signatures so complex that even Kaelin's enhanced senses couldn't parse them completely. "Please," Marcus whispered as Kaelin knelt beside him. "Don't send me away. I'll be good, I promise. I won't cause any trouble." "Who hurt you?" Kaelin asked gently, his protective instincts overwhelming any concern for protocol. "The village found me hiding in their grain stores," Marcus replied. "They said mixed bloods are abominations that need to be cleansed from the world. They were going to burn me, but I got away." Kaelin felt a familiar rage building in his chest. The same narrow-mindedness that had led to his own rejection was now being used to justify violence against children, whose only crime was existing outside traditional categories. "What's your name?" he asked. "Marcus," the boy said. "But I don't have a family name. My parents were killed before they could tell me what I really am. Nobody claims me." "Well, Marcus," Kaelin said, making a decision that would change all their lives. "I claim you. You're safe now." He carried the injured child into the castle, where Lucian took one look at the situation and immediately summoned medical supplies. The vampire examined Marcus's wounds with the same careful attention he had shown to Kaelin during his recovery, his immortal hands gentle as he cleaned cuts and applied healing salves. "He can stay," Lucian said without being asked. "Children should not suffer for the prejudices of adults." Over the following weeks, Marcus proved to be a remarkable addition to their growing family. His mixed heritage had left him with unusual abilities. He could shift into multiple animal forms, had enhanced senses even in human shape, and possessed an intuitive understanding of magic that surprised even Lucian. More importantly, his presence brought out protective instincts in both Kaelin and the vampire that neither had expected to feel. They found themselves working together to provide Marcus with the stability and affection he had never received, creating a family unit that defied every conventional definition but somehow worked perfectly. "Am I your son now?" Marcus asked one evening as they shared dinner in the castle's great hall. Kaelin looked at Lucian, unsure how to answer. They had never formally discussed their relationship or their roles in Marcus's life, but the boy's question forced them to confront the reality of what they had become. "If you would like to be," Lucian said carefully, "then yes, you are our son. Does that make you my father's?" "It makes us your family," Kaelin replied, and felt something warm and right settle in his chest as he said the words. "We choose to love you and protect you, and you choose to be our son. That's all family really is, people who choose each other." Marcus beamed at them both. "Then I choose you too. Both of you." Their peaceful domestic life was disrupted one autumn morning when messengers arrived from the various supernatural kingdoms, carrying invitations to a grand council that would determine the future of interspecies relations throughout Erenville. The events at Shadowmere had sent ripples throughout the supernatural world. forcing leaders to confront questions they had been avoiding for centuries. "They want you to speak," Lucian said as he read through the formal invitation. "As the moon touched, your words will carry weight that mine alone never could." "What would I say?" Kaelin asked, the prospect of addressing the most powerful beings in their world both thrilling and terrifying. "The truth," Lucian replied simply. "Your story, our story. The proof that love can transcend any boundary if people are brave enough to let it." The Grand Council convened in the neutral city of Harmonia, where representatives from every major supernatural community gathered in a massive amphitheater that had been built specifically for such occasions. Dragons perched on the highest tiers, their ancient eyes surveying the assembled crowd with calculating interest. Vampires occupied the shadowed sections, their pale forms nearly invisible in the darkness they preferred. Werewolf packs clustered together according to traditional alliances, while demons and other creatures found their own spaces in the complex social geography of the gathering. When Kaelin took the speaker's platform, wearing simple robes that emphasized his transformed nature rather than hiding it, a hush fell over the entire assembly. The legendary Moontouched had become a figure of myth and speculation throughout the supernatural world, and seeing him in person was a profound experience for many of the delegates. "I stand before you as living proof that our old assumptions about love, strength, and worthiness are not only wrong but harmful," Kaelin began, his voice carrying clearly throughout the amphitheater. "I was cast out by my pack for loving someone they deemed inappropriate, condemned for possessing abilities they considered unsuitable, branded as broken for refusing to conform to expectations that would have destroyed my soul." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "But I found someone who valued my differences instead of fearing them. Someone who saw strength in my gentleness and beauty in my magic. Together, we have built a family that includes not just ourselves but a child who was abandoned by a world that couldn't accept his mixed heritage." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as delegates processed the implications of what he was describing. "We are not asking you to abandon your traditions," Kaelin continued. "We are asking you to expand them, to make room for kinds of love and family that your ancestors might not have imagined but that your descendants will take for granted." He gestured toward the section where Lucian sat with Marcus between them, the three of them representing everything the council was being asked to consider. "Love is not weakness. Difference is not corruption. And the families we choose can be just as sacred as the ones we're born into. This is not a threat to your way of life. It's an expansion of what life can be." The speech that followed was passionate but carefully reasoned, drawing on ancient laws and precedents to argue for change while respecting the concerns of traditional communities. Kaelin spoke for nearly an hour, weaving together personal experience and political necessity to create a vision of a future where love could flourish regardless of species boundaries. When he finished, the silence that filled the amphitheater was profound and charged with possibility. Then, slowly, delegates began to stand. First a few progressive vampires, then some younger werewolves, then dragons who had lived long enough to see the futility of rigid thinking. The formal vote that followed was closer than Kaelin had hoped but decisive enough to matter. By a margin of nearly 2-1, the Grand Council voted to recognize interspecies partnerships as legitimate under supernatural law, to protect mixed heritage children from persecution, and to establish sanctuaries where those who didn't fit traditional categories could find safety and acceptance. "You've changed the world," Lucian told him that night as they celebrated in their rooms at the diplomatic quarter. "Not just for us, but for everyone who comes after us." "We changed it together," Kaelin corrected, pulling his vampire mate close while Marcus slept peacefully in the adjoining room. "Your strength gave me the platform to speak. Your love gave me the courage to hope. And our family gave me something worth fighting for." The return to Shadowmere felt like coming home in the truest sense of the word. The castle had been transformed during their absence, expanded to accommodate the growing number of refugees and seekers who had heard about their sanctuary. What had begun as a single vampire's domain had become a thriving community where beings of all kinds could find acceptance and purpose. "Look what we built," Kaelin said one evening as they stood on the castle's highest balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Below them, The grounds were filled with the sounds of children playing, adults working together on various projects, and the general hum of a community that had found its rhythm. "Look what you built," Lucian corrected, wrapping his arms around Kaelin from behind. "I provided the resources, but you provided the vision. You showed everyone what was possible when they stopped being afraid of difference." As the months turned to years, their story became legend throughout the supernatural world. Not as a fairy tale with neat endings and simple morals, but as proof that love could transcend species, that families could be chosen rather than assigned, and that the strongest bonds were often those forged in the fire of adversity. Marcus grew into a remarkable young man, his mixed heritage making him a bridge between different communities. He chose to dedicate his life to helping other children who found themselves caught between worlds, carrying forward the lessons he had learned from his chosen fathers. "You saved me," he told them on the day he left to establish his own sanctuary in a distant kingdom. "Now I want to save others." "You were never ours to save," Kaelin replied, embracing the young man who had become his son in every way that mattered. "You were always meant to save yourself. We just gave you a safe place to do it." Other children had joined their family over the years, refugees from persecution, orphans of various species, young people who had been cast out for refusing to conform to narrow expectations. Each brought their own stories of pain and survival, and each found in their growing community something they had never expected to discover: true acceptance. But perhaps the most significant change was in Kaelin himself. The shy, uncertain Omega who had been crushed by his pack's rejection had grown into something magnificent, not just in his legendary moon-touched form, but in his role as a leader who inspired others to embrace their authentic selves. "I never imagined this was possible," he told Lucian one night as they lay together in their bed, surrounded by the comfortable quiet of their thriving community. "Not just our love, but all of this. The lives we've helped rebuild, the families we've helped create, the world we've helped change. You made it possible," Lucian replied, his silver eyes reflecting the moonlight that streamed through their window. "Your refusal to be broken by rejection, your insistence on healing rather than hurting, your courage to love openly despite every reason to hide, that's what created all of this." "We created it together," Kaelin insisted, as he always did. "Your strength and my healing, your resources and my vision, your love and my hope. None of it would have worked without both of us." Outside their window, the moon hung full and silver in the star-filled sky, its light blessing a world that was slowly learning to embrace love in all its forms. In the distance, they could hear the sound of night-flying creatures returning to their roosts, their wings carrying messages of hope and acceptance to communities across the supernatural realm. Their story continued to unfold, day by day, choice by choice, love by love. And in a world that was finally beginning to understand that difference was strength rather than weakness, they stood as living proof that the most beautiful families are often the ones that refuse to follow traditional patterns, that insist on writing their own definitions of love and belonging, and that prove every day that when people choose to see past their fears and prejudices, miracles are not only possible but inevitable. "I love you," Kaelin whispered into the darkness, the words as fresh and powerful as they had been the first time he had spoken them. "And I love you," Lucian replied, his ancient voice warm with the kind of happiness he had never expected to feel. "For all the days of this life and whatever comes after." As they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms and surrounded by the family they had built through choice and commitment, they knew that their story was far from over. There would be new challenges, new refugees to help, new battles to fight against prejudice and narrow-mindedness. But they would face it all together, the vampire and the moon-touched, proving every day that the strongest love stories are not the ones written by fate but the ones written by choice, that the most powerful magic is not the kind that destroys but the kind that heals, and that true strength comes not from forcing others to conform but from having the courage to be authentically, unapologetically yourself. The fire in their hearth burned low and warm, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the room they shared. In those shadows, if you looked closely, you might see the shapes of all the lives they had touched, all the hearts they had healed, all the families they had helped create. And in the center of it all, three figures slept peacefully: the vampire lord who had learned to love again, the moon-touched healer who had transformed rejection into redemption, and the mixed heritage child who represented the future they were all working to create. Their love was a beacon of hope in a world that was slowly learning that difference was not something to be feared but something to be celebrated, that healing was not weakness but the most powerful force in the universe, and that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the worst possible endings and end with the most unlikely but perfect beginnings.